Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Ag Summit, virtual Ag Summit. Wish that we could be in person sharing face to face, but that's not a viable option right now. So I appreciate your participation via Zoom as we live our lives by Zoom, it seems like these days. I'm glad at least we have this option, like I said, and today we're going to focus on rural broadband. And so with us today, we have two guests with some great insight, and they will update us on their work in the area of rural broadband, its development and deployment. And it's exciting to see how far we've come, but also I think it will be informative to see where we go from here. We know that broadband is a vital part of our infrastructure, actually. And I think there's common agreement that broadband is part of our nation's infrastructure. Now, I wish that we could get a bill done at the national level on infrastructure, and it's probably not in the cards right now, but hopefully it will be early next year. And so we can, in the meantime, though, I think work very diligently to still formulate what needs to be in a bill like that. Joining us today is State Senator Curt Friesen and Mr. Zach Hunnicutt, a member of the Nebraska Rural Broadband Task Force. Senator Friesen represents the 34th district in the Nebraska legislature. That district includes Nance, Merrick, and Hamilton counties and a portion of Hall County, including parts of Grand Island. Senator Friesen sits on the Revenue Committee as well as serving as chairman of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. Senator Friesen resides near Henderson, Nebraska, where he farms with his family. Zach Hunnicutt is a farmer from Giltner. He raises corn, soybeans, popcorn, seed corn, and organic crops with his family. He serves on the Nebraska Rural Broadband Task Force, as well as the FCC's Rural Broadband Deployment Working Group of the Precision Agriculture Task Force. Actually, the Nebraska Rural Broadband Task Force was founded by a bill introduced by Senator Friesen in 2018 and focuses on the availability, adoption, and affordability of broadband services across our state. To kick things off, Senator Friesen will lead us with an update on what you're working on in the legislature and what has been happening, I guess. I know a lot has been, and how you work to promote broadband expansion and development in Nebraska. So Senator Friesen, you want to kick it off?
Well, thanks, Congressman Smith. It's a good opportunity to talk about this, what I feel is extremely important, especially for rural Nebraska. And so we started a couple years ago, working on how do we get actual good high-speed broadband into rural Nebraska. And we started with creating the Broadband Task Force, which Zach Hunnicutt is a part of. But they were kind of the lead in what we did this year in LB 992 is trying to work on all of the issues that were brought up by the Broadband Task Force. And so what we've found over the time is that we were under the assumption that all municipalities and cities out basically in rural Nebraska had fairly decent broadband. And through the hearings we've had, we found out that a lot of them did not have what we would consider 25.3 or higher. And so we have some issues there too, but getting broadband out into rural, and when I say rural, I'm always talking about outside of the city or village limits, was what the focus of the task force has been. And so it's trying to leverage the Nebraska Universal Service Fund along with the Federal Universal Service Fund and any other infrastructure dollars that come along. And so we have, that's been our main goal, is working with the different companies, and we've got some great rural companies, telephone companies, incumbent carriers that have done a fantastic job of putting broadband out into rural areas, and then we have others that are struggling, and it has to do with density and the hookups. And when we talk about rural ag, we stop talking about how many people may live per mile. We talk about hookups per mile, and now the demand for precision agriculture. It might be whether a pivot is hooked up to that internet service or bin facilities or other things like that. So it's the number of hookups maybe now that we need to be focused on, and whether it's mobile access or fixed access, we still need I guess, fiber out there to some extent to make that happen. What we worked on this year was allowing probably easier leasing of dark fiber from power districts that may have fiber in place. And it'll be those public-private partnerships, I think, working with rural power districts that really maybe help facilitate getting broadband out into the extreme rural areas where it's difficult maybe for one company or one entity to do it by themselves. So with that, that's kind of what we've been working on, and we know that going forward, there'll be some other issues probably pop up. So this isn't the end. This is probably what we'd call maybe the middle, and we'll be continually working to fine tune it yet to make sure that we can get this done in a fiscally responsible way and yet something that works.
Sure. Thank you. I would remind everyone participating that if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, just please type that into the chat box there, and we will go over those questions here in a moment. Zach, you want to give us an update on your perspective and what your findings have been, and anything else you'd want to share?
Yeah, the Senator covered it pretty well. We've been talking about on the broadband task force, and that slowed down a little bit over the last few months as far as us meeting in person. But on the FCC's working group that I'm a part of, it's really similar challenges that we're seeing there. It's just meeting the challenges of how to get that, not just the last mile, but the last acre is one phrase we've been throwing around about how to get to everybody and get to every spot that needs connected. It's there's a whole smorgasbord of options out there for ways to deliver internet out to where it needs to be. Everything from fiber access, which is obviously ideal, to so there's a test in Indiana where they're going to be delivering it via a blimp. So I mean, there's really kind of all sorts of options out there, and so really it's figuring out what's the best way to do it, and then ultimately who's going to pay for it is what a lot of it comes down to, because it's not necessarily going to be a profitable thing to get to some of these areas, but it's infrastructure that needs built out, and so it's just a matter of figuring out the best way to make that happen.
You said, I didn't quite catch, you said something about Indiana. Can you say that again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Indiana, there's I think it's about a 10-county area that they are going to be delivering internet kind of wireless via a blimp. So that's definitely thinking outside the box. We just got a little update on that in a committee on the Rural Broadband Task Force yesterday. So I don't know that that's necessarily going to work everywhere, but it's just illustrative of the kinds of different options people are pursuing to make this happen.
Very good. Now, we've got a scenario, I think, right now, of course, with kids back in a lot of the schools. It probably isn't what it was, say, last April. But, having connectivity is one thing. But if mom and dad are both working on the internet from home and 3 or 4 kids are going to school on the internet from home, I mean, that's going to test a lot of capacity there. How much of has there been much discussion about, someone might have some access but not enough? Yeah,
we've seen actually quite a bit of that when you get out in the rural areas, where especially if it's delivered probably through a fixed wireless where they don't have the capacity to handle that volume. Most of the urban areas, like Lincoln especially, has fiber to the home everywhere. They've not experienced that on the most part. But when you get out into some of the other areas where you have systems that are, still maybe a DSL, and where volume kicks up, it slows down. They've run into that quite often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did talk about that quite a bit. Just that the educational access, even before all of this happened. Just the disparities that there are in rural communities and even in urban communities, just that you might not even if the service is available, you have kids that might not be in family situations where they can afford it, and we're so much of school before COVID was happening online, that was an issue, and now that's just been amped up pretty significantly. And so it's really highlighted the challenge that's there, that it's not just after school to before school time, but now it's become a 24-hour challenge.
Mm-hmm. Right. What's the frequency of satellite access? You know?
I think back in a few years ago, there were a lot more companies offering satellite access, and I still think it's out there. But again, you go back to cloud cover or rainstorm events where you don't have access then,
Yeah.
and the latency is not just the same as fiber; it's just a delay. Mm-hmm. So it's accessible, but I don't think the speeds are there that you can have with fiber or some of the other high-speed wireless options even.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Eric, we have some questions.
Sorry about that. So far, no questions, just a few comments. Robert Post from Banner County saying that their provider has received several grants and the timeline is so tight that they fear they can't complete them all. And I believe that they are CARES grants. So I guess a little bit of a question in that comment there. And probably just as a reminder to all the participants on, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and click on the chat option and type in the question there.
Well, I think this is referring to probably to the state of Nebraska's, the CARES Act money that Governor Ricketts has put towards rural broadband. And he put $40 million of money into that program, and they have basically taken applications. I have not seen the final list yet. They had a deadline several weeks ago. They opened it up again to other groups again. I don't know that I think they probably, the applications have ceased, but it does have a December 31st deadline of being up and running. I don't know how strict they'll have to hold to that. Hopefully there's maybe some changes. I'm not sure the reason for that, other than there might have been some requirements from the federal level, but these dollars were going to be putting broadband into smaller communities. And so I know of several applications that were successful, but I wouldn't want to name them right now, but there was $40 million put into this. I think it's going to really help out some of the smaller communities out there that do not have good access.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Eric?
So far, no other questions. There was a comment there about towers being involved. I know a question that we sometimes get at the office is just about the broadband task force and what it entails. So I think that one could be a fair one to ask that we get sometimes while we're out on the road.
Just from the broadband task force, I mean, their whole, I think their mission was trying to, find out again how we can leverage this and make it happen with limited dollars that we have. And I'll let Zach go into more detail, but it was, the focus of it, was trying to figure out, what role might power districts have in it? What are the different delivery methods? Does it have to be fiber to the home? And I think in Nebraska's case, it's going to be maybe all of the above in some cases, because when you get out into the real sparse areas, maybe it doesn't work to put fiber to the home 15 miles out to one customer. We're going to have to look at all options out there. And again, just because there's fiber to the home doesn't mean that the person is going to be able to afford to hook up. So that's some of the challenges.
Yeah,
okay.
Just broadly, just the task force trying to bring all stakeholders together to figure out the best way forward. Because I don't think there's anybody in the state that denies the necessity of bringing the entire state to having modern broadband access. But the challenges that are there aren't small. I know even our local provider is deploying fiber to the home all through its footprint, but they've been working on this for, it's been at least a 20-year project. So it's not something that's just a quick and easy thing to ramp up in places that haven't necessarily been as prepared. So it's like Senator mentioned, what role does public power play? Where we have all infrastructure out there already that can be leveraged. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to view what does broadband access look like, and then what does it look like going forward? I think one of the concerns we had was not wanting to build something that met 2019 or 2020 standards and then be stuck and trying to figure it out again in 20 years because we were behind, but building something that was future proofed also. And so there's bringing everybody together in a room to cover that was really the best way to move forward on this. And so it's not there's no easy answers, but we definitely are farther along now than we would have been without this task force.
Looks like we've got some questions here. Eric?
We do. The first question is, could you give us some idea of the percentage of Nebraskans that have no real usable internet, and what percentage consider their internet access to be inadequate?
Well, I think some of the numbers I've seen, there's about, if you're talking rural, there's about 63% of Nebraskans, I think, have access to what we'd call 25/3 or higher. And that may be, it probably could be a fixed wireless, but it wouldn't be what Zach was talking about being future proof, so to speak, because again, you have limited capacity with that option. We're, compared to our neighboring states, we're like number 6 out of 7. So we have not done a great job of getting this done, but I think with what we've accomplished so far with the task force, I think it puts us on a path to play catch up if we can.
Okay, next question. Eric?
The next question that came in, is the broadband going to be 4G or 5G?
So I was on the subcommittee that was looking at the different technologies. Yes, is the answer. We're kind of looking at all options. 5G presents some real challenges in rural areas because of its limited range. It's really a technology built more for an urban setting, because you're talking about needing towers, little micro towers every several hundred feet. So we're not going to see the sandhills probably blanketed in 5G towers. There's probably some potential for 5G towers to be along highways and places that have, again, existing infrastructure that can maybe figure out a partnership to make that happen. But the 4G and 5G really just refer to that's cellular data technology, and so that they're actually serviced by the fiber lines and such that need to be laid all over the state. So there will be 4G and 5G as part of the puzzle, but they're just a couple of the technologies that'll need to be used to get access to everybody.
One thing I wanted to just clarify a little bit, when I said 63% have access, that's according to the FCC's 477 forms, which we all know are probably skewed a little bit to the high side. So until we find better mapping, I guess that number might be a little bit on the high side.
Yeah, mapping has been a real challenge. I know several state farm bureaus over the last few years have been trying to have members map what their speeds look like and where they did and didn't have connectivity. We rely a lot on what providers provide for maps, which of course they're going to they're going to take the most optimistic view possible on that coverage. I know there's with the FCC, I know there's another working group that's I think working specifically on mapping. So it's figuring out those numbers and what exactly our challenge is. It's not just unique to Nebraska, but it's a nationwide issue.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Eric?
Another question that's come in, can the power grid be used for delivery?
Well, I think that's been probably one of the main issues we've worked on in 992 is that right now the power industry that's out there, the small public power providers have easements that allow for power delivery, but they don't have an easement that contains the ability to put communication services on those same poles. So that was one thing that 992 did, was clarify that they're able to do that. There's a process now that they'll have to go through, but there is technology where that top ground wire on the power lines can incorporate fiber into it. So the possibility is there. Now, whether or not you want to go above ground or below ground, there's quite a discussion amongst providers yet as to what's the best option there. But when you get out in the rural areas, they've some of the data that they're looking at now shows that costs can be cut considerably by putting it into that top wire and incorporating it into their power lines. So I think that's an option that's there now, and we'll see once in the future here if the public-private partnership portion of that works and how they might make that facilitate putting that fiber up on the poles, and if everything goes according to plans, I think everything is in place now to allow them to do that.
Yeah, and I know there were concerns about liability, and if you got the power district trying to service poles and dealing with the fiber line on there, or if fiber line's broken, who's responsible for it? I mean, there's just some concerns out there that need to be answered for sure. Our subcommittee dealing with the technologies on the Rural Broadband Task Force was having a meeting with an engineering firm that is working with Facebook that's developed some new robotic technology to install fiber over the power lines. That it has to do with the speed of deployment. Instead of doing maybe a kilometer a day, they're talking several kilometers a day. So it's kind of technology that's out there and ready to go, and could really speed up deployment.
Okay. Eric?
Next question that's come in, is there any hope that the National First Net project will be able to provide broadband to those areas that are not now, nor probably financially viable in the future, able to have adequate broadband?
I think the FirstNet project, and that AT&T won the bid in Nebraska. And so I get regular emails about how many cell towers they're putting into service regularly, and they are, there's a lot of towers gone into place in the last year. So I don't know how widespread they are in western Nebraska yet, in the more rural parts, but they have definitely put up a lot of towers in this area. So I think that might be, in some areas where you get into that real sparse areas, that might be a viable option there. I don't know that.
Okay. All right. Eric, next question.
Next question that's come in, along with the infrastructure that definitely needs attention, is there any thought about digital literacy? Just because we have the infrastructure doesn't mean we know how to utilize it to the fullest.
Well,
yeah,
that's a good question. Again, it seems like the younger people these days are very more educated on how to use digital devices. But I mean, even old guys like me really depend on it now already, and feel very comfortable with it. So I think there's just, there's probably community colleges offer courses too, but maybe Zach can talk more about that. He's got kids maybe that young age that know a lot more than I do about it.
Yeah, that is one thing that will be necessary. Just I think, as we've seen, the older generations even figure out things like Facebook and smartphones. It's not terribly hard to learn, but we do need to ensure that everyone is being given access to that education of how to use the internet well, how to use their devices correctly. I've got kids from 12 down to 3 that, on the one hand, they seem to figure out pretty intuitively how to use the technology, but we have to be pretty intentional in teaching them how to use it wisely. And they're doing, we homeschool. We homeschooled even before COVID. So they've done a lot over the internet anyway. And so now it's a matter of, as they do more and more, just making sure they're knowing how to do it. We don't have any formalized plan for education, but I think the opening is there for, in the schools for the younger kids, or for community colleges to offer that kind of education. And that's definitely something that should be considered.
I've been working a lot on telehealth, and so telehealth means different things to different people. Obviously, we've got anywhere. I'm working on a bill that would facilitate more interactions between nursing facilities and hospitals. But telehealth, let's face it, it's about staying at home and being able to get on your phone and talk to a provider. So I think that, we want to look for ways where, the community can step in perhaps and help the elderly get onto the phone. I mean, we want to treat in place, obviously, but there's going to be some a learning curve here, I guess, where we want the elderly to have the access that they need, but it will require some training there. And once they get comfortable with it, I think it'll lure them in even more. A lot of the elderly, they're already, as mentioned by Zach, that they're already interacting quite a bit on Facebook and other platforms. So looks like there's some more questions. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, we've got another couple questions here. The next question is, have there been any studies or surveys done on what the economic impact might be if there was more consistent and higher quality internet access in the rural parts of the state?
I don't have current data in front of me, but I mean, people have looked at that. When I look at rural Nebraska, if we're gonna attract our young kids back here, and we did that when we had a good ag economy, we did attract a lot of young people back. But the thing is, they almost had to move to a town with high-speed broadband access, because it's possible that their spouse continued their work where they were able to hook up to high-speed broadband and maintain their employment where they were previously employed. So when I look at rural Nebraska, I mean, we've been losing population for 100 years. And if we don't get broadband out here, I mean, that slide is going to continue to happen. So I look at it as it's the biggest economic development, whether it's telehealth or any number of other issues. Every time when I go to any meetings or anything, everybody, they constantly, whether it's healthcare or education or roads or anything else, they all say, well, first we've got to get broadband out there. That is the number one issue as far as economic development. And when you have businesses now that maybe want to move into more rural areas of the state, they do have to have access to rural broadband, high speed, good, reliable broadband, not what's out there in some cases. So, I mean, I think it's really important if we're going to have some economic development occur and we can diversify the economy out in rural Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if I had a few minutes to go back and look through materials we've had from the task force, I think we've seen some studies trying to put a dollar amount to it. But I mean, the reality is it's about like considering what the economic impact is of putting electricity to an area. I mean, it's a necessary piece of infrastructure that, you know, eventually if you don't have it, you won't have any economic activity going on.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I look at the growing pains of the Front Range of Colorado, you know, whether it's the transportation infrastructure, whether it's availability of water, various things that, you know, I think the very best thing we can do to prepare to absorb some of those growing pains over there and get folks to move here to Western Nebraska is broadband. And I mean, it seems rather basic, and, you know, then it becomes more about how can we make sure it's affordable for folks regardless of where they live. Zach, similar to electricity, like you mentioned, we've done it before. Let's do it again. So, next question.
Next question. Did I understand correctly? The broadband may not be affordable because of the cost to get it there in some places?
That's exactly right. I mean, you look at the cost of deployment of fiber into these, where you have a low number of hookups per mile, and the cost to do that, you cannot recoup that in the fees that you can charge. And so at some point there, it's going to take a subsidy of some sort for companies to step out and do that. And that's where we're hoping the public-private partnership, maybe with the rural electrics, where they have a need for broadband out to their substations and to control some of their switches and things like that, that they can partner with them and help drive down that cost. And again, there is just no economic case sometimes when you get out into the real sparse areas where you can say that a company could actually afford to put this out there without some sort of subsidy or public-private partnership.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the basic cost of it would not be affordable to the consumer. And so that's the basic question we're trying to address, is how do we make it so the consumer can actually afford it? That's ultimately the base challenge of this whole thing, is to figure out how to make it affordable.
Yeah. How much, I look at how our own household here in Gear has changed perhaps in terms of what we subscribe to. Now, before COVID hit, because my wife, our little guy, and I were back and forth to Washington a lot, and not always here in Gearing, we decided, 3 years ago, to just subscribe to internet, no cable. And that was more of a cost thing, really. And so COVID hits, we stay in Gearing basically, except when I go to Washington to vote very briefly. And for various reasons, we haven't missed cable. And no offense to our cable providers, but we've just stuck with the internet. We get our news online. So we don't even have to really watch some of the obnoxious cable news coverage. And I have to assume that other people are doing that too, whether it's a cost driver or whatever else. So how much should we care about that? What do we need to be planning for? Any other kind of shifts toward or away from various provisions?
Well, you've seen exactly what's happened to shopping, especially with COVID driving it. More and more people are shopping online. It's changed how the brick and mortar stores are going to operate. Cable companies currently do offer broadband over their cable. And so it's not necessarily that they're just offering cable TV these days. There's communities who, as the broadband supplier, is the cable company. Right. So they may have fiber to the home in some areas, and you can choose so many different services. And I know a lot of people now, they do streaming of all their TV. They don't subscribe to the Dish or DirecTV or some of those. Everything they do, all their entertainment, movies, comes over high-speed broadband. And so if we're going to have access to the same things that our urban counterparts have, and if we're going to we need to have those same options available here in rural Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in our house, as soon as our internet speed got to a point where we could, watch Netflix or Hulu and also do anything else on any other device, we dropped our cable and went to it. I half joked that the best way to get Nebraska unified behind a broadband plan would be for the Big Ten Network to go 100% streaming. If the internet was the only way you're going to see Husker football, you're gonna figure out how to deploy it everywhere pretty quick.
Well, we'll see if the Big Ten gets that creative. So far, I'm not. Well, that's a good point, though. And so much of it has to do with pricing structure, and this part gets to be a little bit frustrating because they've got introductory pricing and so forth. Because our internet is through one of our cable companies here. And so, there are the options there, but it would be interesting to know. And of course, cable companies are kind of the middleman. When I've heard what, for example, ESPN charges the cable companies, I was kind of shocked. That it was fairly significant, and of course they have to pass that along. And they're somewhat captive there. But when you look at the cost of Netflix and what that opens up in terms of options for the consumer, gosh, that sure seems a lot more affordable than what ESPN would offer in terms of fees that you have to pay, and then you have to get everything. And anyway, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here of how can we encourage, through public policy, again, not mandates, but encourage through public policy as many options as possible for consumers.
I think one of the challenges we've been looking at a little bit is when you get into the municipalities, at least the taxes, the franchise fees, the occupation taxes. You have telecommunications providers, you have cable companies, and you have broadband suppliers, and they all operate under different rules and different taxes. And trying to, and all of those companies are now doing all of the above. Technology has changed, so you got telecommunication providers offering broadband and cable, and like I said, all three of them are doing the same thing, and that they're operating under different tax policies. And so one of the things that we've found, at least, is that some cities out there were charging really high pole attachment fees for hanging cable on their poles. And so those costs are passed on directly to the consumer. It's just what I call a hidden tax. I would rather it be more transparent. So we've tried to address some of that in what we call our small cell bill that we did a couple years ago. And so I think we're finding that in other areas now too. There's sometimes rules and regulations and taxes at the local level that probably add to that cost also.
Are any municipalities aggressively structuring their policies so as to kind of recruit more broadband offerings?
There are municipalities that really do use that as a selling point, but at the same time, they also have high fees associated with those companies trying to put broadband in their communities. So it's a hidden tax that they can put on that nobody sees, but yet it adds to that cost. But municipalities definitely, if they have fiber to the home in their community, it is a selling point when they're talking about trying to attract businesses or people to live in the community.
Well, I would think, look at Strive TV there in your neighborhood. I would think they would be someone that any community would aggressively recruit, not just in the short term, but the long term. When you look at the innovation involved and how there's, the sky is the limit on many of these approaches, and I would think that high fees and tax would be very stifling to a lot of these innovative companies.
Well, the smaller towns like Henderson, for instance, they don't really do that. The smaller communities are working really hard just to attract people. It's the larger communities usually that look at it as a revenue source. But yeah, Strive TV would not be located in Henderson if we did not have fiber to the business there. I mean, that is, they are strictly dependent on high-speed broadband, and a great company. They're growing fast, and they attracted some young people back to the community, which is
Right.
exactly what we want. And they're diversified from agriculture.
Yeah. And in some ways, help support ag communities, because there are just more options there. And, and as mentioned earlier, precision agriculture is so technology intense that I would hope we can see parallel development with more infrastructure. So as technology becomes more and more intense there for agriculture.
Yeah, if you look back at when we had high price commodities, the expansion of technology in ag was tremendous. Everybody was adapting the latest technology. And now with ag kind of in a slump, that is, I think, slowed down a little bit. But.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you touched on a good point there, that, obviously we need broadband for precision ag technology, but having broadband won't just it won't just pump up our number one economy, which is agriculture, but it'll diversify our economy more and make it more robust. So if we're at times where agriculture is a little slower, it's not such a devastating thing to local communities to have a slow ag economy if we've also got some other things going on that broadband help make possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Eric, do we have any more questions?
I've got one more, I guess, that was submitted. The question is, how has COVID-19 impacted any of the rural broadband task force timelines?
I don't know that it's had an impact, other than maybe just point out some deficiencies we have when you have kids that wanted to go online for distance learning. So I think our holdup right now is just access to capital and how fast can you put fiber into the ground, and with the cost involved, that's the limiting factor right now. I think everybody is kind of on board with doing this as fast as we can. How do we leverage the dollars that are available out there to do the most we can?
Yeah,
so
the timing was, the timing actually was okay from our standpoint, because about the time we had to shut down meeting and stuff was sort of the time we'd handed the baton back to the legislature to deal with our recommendations. So it didn't really slow down the task force much at all.
So as we look at the federal level of broadband being part of our infrastructure and so forth, as Senator Friesen just mentioned, the need for capital, what could we do, what should we do at the federal level to, basically encourage investment, make it easier to access capital? What would you point to if there was one thing that you would focus on?
Well, I think I guess the first thing is goes back to mapping, but after that, the access to capital, and that can be tax policy. Sometimes is how we view investments and how we tax those investments can be an easy way to drive development of something. And you are, so to speak, picking winners and losers, but this is something that I think is so important to everyone. It is very broad a benefit to the communities that it's easy to say if we make that investment and use tax policy to drive it, that would probably be something that the federal government could do, and then just helping investors make sure that they see the value in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of these discussions kind of get compared to the rural electrification. And there's similar challenges, but there's some differences. When the power poles came through here in the 40s, there weren't rural power providers. The challenge we have is there are rural internet providers. It's just that they're not able to deploy the best technologies at an affordable price. And so finding that way to work with the providers that are there, not just overrun them with larger national companies, but figure out ways to work with the providers that are already there in the communities to find the best ways to deploy the technology.
How much have you guys discussed the definition of affordability?
I think the task force definition is that rural access should be comparable to what our urban counterparts pay. And so right now I'd say we are quite a bit higher, and we did have some numbers, but I don't have them in front of me, but rural pays more right now than urban, but we don't have competition. We're going to have one provider, where in urban areas you may have 2, 3, or 4 choices on where you might get your broadband. So there is definitely competition there, and our costs are also less. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and knowing that it is rather tedious and just a hassle to change providers, even inside city limits here, I'm not confident that there's as much straight up true competition as we would like there to be, even though there are choices out there. I mean, it is such a hassle to change providers that it be a little frustrating.
That's probably true. I don't have to make those choices. There's just one.
Got here.
Very good. Any other questions?
No other questions submitted.
All right. Curt and Zach, anything else you'd like to add? Anything else on your minds?
Well, I think as you know, as we run into more issues as we get further along in this process, I think the task force is set up to proceed ahead and keep looking at the issues that come up, or if they run into roadblocks somewhere, the task force will probably come with some recommendations, and then the legislature will continue to make modifications to that. And if there's, if we see things at the federal level, I mean, we always feel that we can contact you and work with you, because I think it's important. You said it's important to you. And so I feel we have good partners right now, and we'll just see what the changes we've made, how that impacts it, and what kind of snags we might run into down the road. But right now, from what I'm hearing, I mean, there's a lot of miles of fiber going in. And it's just a matter now of as we get into these smaller communities, will it get done? How much capital do we need, and what is the need? Or, we realize we can't hook up everyone at one time. It's not going to happen. So it's going to be a process and a priority of where we go with it. So I still think we keep working going forward, and as we see things, I hope we'll contact you if it's a federal issue. But really, it is a very local issue. There's communities that can get more involved with their provider. We have the LB 840 money. It's economic development tax that a city can levy that can help with sometimes working with a private provider to get broadband in. So there's a lot of options out there, and we just have to use all of them that are available to us before we come and ask for federal help if we don't have to.
Yeah, and I would add that, even though, in rural areas, we don't always we don't necessarily think people in the urban centers really know the struggle we're dealing with out here. And while that might sometimes be true, I think just know that there's a broad coalition of people working together to try to meet this challenge. And even if someone in Lincoln or Omaha or Washington, D.C. doesn't exactly understand what the rural internet challenges are like, there are lots and lots of people working together to try to solve this challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Eric, looks like one more question came in. We'll take this one, and then I'll probably wrap it up.
Yep, that sounds good, sir. We've got one question left. At the federal level, how much collaboration is there around a national broadband effort? We read where one congressman in South Carolina has been working on it to see not traction. We hear things in Nebraska about others, but is there a concerted effort we can expect?
Short answer is yes. I think that when we look at all the moving parts right now, I sense that there is more agreement than ever before. For example, that broadband is part of our nation's infrastructure. I think there is a healthy appetite to do an infrastructure bill. I worry that some people won't take yes for an answer. And I think the president has been eager to do an infrastructure bill. He wants a deal. One of his, I think, best qualities is the desire to and the ability to make a deal. And we see what he's done on trade and tax reform. I mean, some big issues. But you take the USMCA, for example, that was a compromise that came together that I think has been one of the biggest bipartisan victories in decades. And huge win for the president, and despite the fact that a lot of folks didn't want the president to get a win. But for example, Speaker Pelosi basically was under so much pressure to deliver a vote on this bill, and it was one of the most bipartisan votes on a trade bill probably in history. And it contains some provisions that many of my Democratic colleagues have been asking for decades. A couple of those provisions, I will tell you, gave me a little bit of heartburn, but they weren't deal breakers. And so we ultimately got it done, and I think sent a message to the world that we are serious about trade. Now, when you look at infrastructure and broadband, I think very similarly, the president is eager to make a deal. The president raised a very good point a while back that when it comes to infrastructure, we need to make sure that we've got good, solid competition among bidders, and that we reduce the red tape and the regulations that create so much inefficiency in delivering these projects. If we're not careful, we will see, if say that the fuel tax was just increased along the way with no other changes, we could very easily see inflationary impacts where we have to pay more money for fewer projects. We want to avoid that. We can avoid that. And so just throwing money at it, to me, is not the answer. Do we need investments? Yes. And I want to keep an open mind in terms of how we get there. But we need a multifaceted approach to where we can address some of these things so that we can get more projects for our money. And there are federal policies, literally, there are federal policies on the books that are intended to reduce competition. Seriously, we need to address that. And that's just one thing. We need good, solid competition there to help put downward pressure on costs, and upward pressure on innovation. So appreciate that question. So anyway, thank you to everyone who has been on this morning. Thank you, Zach and Senator Friesen. Thank you, Senator Friesen, for your service in the legislature. I know it hasn't been easy, and really appreciate the fact that you've served in the manner that you have. And I think your constituents are fortunate to have you, and just really, really appreciate what you've done. Meanwhile, please keep in touch as things pop up that need our attention. Please feel free to holler. Tomorrow morning, an hour later than we've been gathering all week, we will have Ambassador Greg Dowd, the Chief Ag Negotiator at the Office of the United States Trade Representative. A great person to have to give us an update on trade in general. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about on that front, especially as it relates to agriculture. And we're all consumers, and trade impacts us as consumers. And so very grateful to have Ambassador Dowd on the schedule tomorrow. But again, please note the difference in time frame tomorrow. But we look forward to having you with us again. So with that, I'll just go ahead and wrap up. But feel free to holler with any questions along the way, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow morning. Thanks. Have a good day.